Listen closely, my friends, because what I am about to tell you will not feel good, and that is exactly the point. There is a quiet myth that keeps most people stuck in place for years, sometimes for their entire lives, and it is the belief that discipline should feel good before it produces results. We have been sold the idea that motivation comes first and action follows, when the truth, the Stoic truth, is the exact opposite. The Stoics knew that feeling was never meant to be the starting point of a disciplined life. Marcus Aurelius did not wait to feel inspired before writing in his journal each night. He sat down, exhausted from ruling an empire, burdened by war and illness and the endless demands of leadership, and he wrote anyway, reflecting on his failures and renewing his commitment to virtue regardless of how depleted he felt. Epictetus, a man born into slavery who later became one of the greatest teachers of his age, did not wait for a surge of motivation before instructing his students that we are not disturbed by events, but by our judgments about them. He taught that mastering our reactions is a daily practice, not a mood that visits us occasionally when the conditions are right. Consistency, to the Stoic mind, is not a feeling you summon from within on a good day. It is a decision you make again and again, often without any emotional reward at all, because you have judged the action to be right and aligned with reason, regardless of how you happen to feel about it in that particular moment. Most people abandon their goals not because the goals were wrong, not because the path was impossible, but because they were waiting for a version of themselves that felt ready, focused, and eager every single day before they would commit fully. That version of you does not exist. It never arrives on schedule, and if you wait for it, you will wait forever while your life quietly passes by. The Stoics understood something that modern culture has largely forgotten, which is that willpower is not a permanent state you either have or lack, but a muscle exercised through friction, and the friction itself is the training. When you force yourself to sit down and work despite not wanting to, when you show up to the gym on a day your body begs you to stay in bed, when you write the difficult email you have been avoiding, you are not being fake or dishonest with yourself. You are practicing the Stoic virtue of self-discipline, choosing what is within your control, which is your effort and your attention, and releasing your grip on what is not within your control, which is your fleeting, unreliable mood. Seneca wrote extensively about the shortness of life, warning his friend Lucilius that people waste their days waiting for the right conditions to begin living deliberately, and those conditions rarely arrive because we are the ones responsible for creating them through action, not the other way around. He said that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and this applies directly to consistency. The resistance you feel before starting a task is almost always worse than the task itself. The dread of beginning is a lie your mind tells you to protect you from effort, and once you push through it, the discomfort dissolves far faster than you expected. Think for a moment about the areas of your life where you have let feeling take precedence over commitment. The workout skipped because you were tired. The writing abandoned because inspiration did not strike on command. The relationship neglected because you were not in the mood to reach out and check in. The business idea shelved because you were waiting to feel confident before taking the first step. Each of these choices, small as they may seem in isolation, trains a pattern, and that pattern slowly becomes your character. Aristotle, whose ideas deeply influenced Stoic thought, said that we are what we repeatedly do, and that excellence is not an act but a habit, something built through consistent repetition rather than a single burst of inspired effort. The Stoics took this idea further by insisting that virtue is the only true good, the only thing genuinely within our control and worthy of our full pursuit. And virtue is built through consistent right action regardless of circumstance, regardless of applause, regardless of how tired or uninspired you feel on any given day. This means showing up on the days you feel unstoppable, brimming with energy and clarity, and it means showing up, more importantly, on the days you feel like giving up entirely. It means treating your commitments as promises to yourself that do not bend to temporary emotional weather, promises that hold steady even when everything inside you is arguing for comfort instead of growth. This is not about becoming a joyless robot who grinds endlessly without reflection or rest. The Stoics valued tranquility deeply, and they often paused to examine whether their efforts were genuinely aligned with reason and virtue, questioning their direction with honest scrutiny rather than blind momentum. But once that alignment was clear to them, once they had reasoned their way to a commitment worth keeping, they did not renegotiate the terms of that commitment every single morning based on how they slept the night before or what mood happened to greet them upon waking. If you want to build real consistency, the kind that actually changes the trajectory of your life, You must stop asking yourself whether you feel like doing the work today. That question is a trap, because the answer will almost always be no, and if you let that answer govern your actions, you will accomplish very little of lasting value. Instead, start asking a different question entirely. Ask whether the work is right. Ask whether it serves your growth. Ask whether it reflects the person you are consciously choosing to become, the character you are shaping through your daily choices whether you realize it or not. Then do the work anyway, feelings aside, mood aside, comfort aside. Discipline built this way becomes quiet and unshakable because it no longer depends on circumstances that are outside your control and subject to constant change. You stop being a passenger carried along by your moods and instead become the author of your own actions, the architect of your own days. This is the heart of Stoic practice, and it is often misunderstood. It is not suppression of emotion, not a cold denial of feeling, but mastery over the gap between stimulus and response, between impulse and action, between the initial flicker of resistance and the deliberate choice you make in spite of it. Chrysippus, one of the early founders of Stoic philosophy, taught that our emotions are not simply things that happen to us, but judgments we make, and if judgments can be examined and reshaped, then so can our relationship to discomfort, to resistance, to the friction that so often keeps us from consistency. This is liberating once you understand it, because it means you are never truly a hostage to how you feel on any given morning. You always retain the power to choose your response, even when the feeling itself is not something you can immediately change. Consider the athlete who trains before dawn in freezing weather, not because the cold feels pleasant, but because the training matters more than the discomfort of the moment. Consider the writer who produces pages on days when the words come slowly and reluctantly, understanding that a mediocre page written today is infinitely more valuable than a brilliant page imagined but never written at all. Consider the parent who remains patient after an exhausting day, not because patience arrives naturally in that instant, but because the value they place on their family outweighs the temporary pull of irritation. In each case, consistency is not the absence of struggle. It is the decision to act rightly despite the struggle, to let reason and values guide behavior rather than the shifting tides of emotion. This is precisely what the Stoics meant when they spoke of living according to nature, not nature as some vague sentimentality about the outdoors, but nature as in our rational capacity, the very thing that distinguishes us and allows us to choose our actions deliberately rather than simply reacting to every passing impulse like an animal driven purely by instinct. Force yourself to be consistent, not because consistency feels good in the moment, because very often it will not, but because it is the only path that leads anywhere worth going in this life. Talent without consistency fades into wasted potential. Inspiration without consistency evaporates into a pleasant memory of what could have been. But consistency, even modest, unglamorous, daily consistency, compounds over months and years into something extraordinary, something that talent and inspiration alone could never achieve on their own. The version of you on the other side of that discipline, the version who has shown up day after day regardless of feeling, will thank the version of you who is struggling today, tired, unmotivated, and unwilling to quit anyway. So the next time you feel the pull toward comfort, toward delay, toward waiting for a better mood or a more convenient moment, remember what the Stoics understood so clearly. The moment will never feel perfectly right. The motivation will not always be there. But your judgment, your reason, and your will remain entirely within your control. And that is more than enough to build a life defined not by fleeting emotion, but by steady, deliberate, unshakable consistency. There is also a deeper reason why forcing yourself to be consistent matters so profoundly, and it has to do with trust, specifically the trust you build with yourself over time. Every time you tell yourself you will do something and then abandon it the moment discomfort appears, you teach your own mind that your word is unreliable, that your commitments are negotiable, that the promises you make to yourself carry no real weight. This erodes something essential, a kind of internal integrity that the Stoics prized above almost everything else. Epictetus taught that freedom is not the ability to do whatever you feel like in the moment, but the capacity to act in accordance with your own considered judgment, unmoved by passing impulse or external pressure. A person who breaks their own commitments constantly is not free at all, no matter how pleasant their days may feel, because they remain enslaved to whatever emotion happens to be loudest at any given time. But a person who honors their commitments, who shows up regardless of mood, begins to experience a different kind of freedom entirely. The freedom of knowing that their actions are governed by their own reasoned values, rather than by chance feelings that drift in and out like weather. This is why consistency is not merely a productivity tactic or a trick for achieving external goals faster. It is a form of self-respect, a daily demonstration to yourself that you are someone whose word means something, even when no one else is watching, even when there is no applause and no immediate reward. Marcus Aurelius wrote his private reflections not for an audience, not for glory, but as a discipline meant purely for himself, a way of holding himself accountable to the standard he had set day after day, in the quiet hours when nobody else could see whether he kept his promise to himself or not. That is the truest test of consistency, not what you do when people are watching and praising your effort, but what you do in the silent, unnoticed moments when quitting would cost you nothing but your own integrity. Consider also that consistency compounds in ways that are often invisible in the short term, which is precisely why so many people give up before they ever see the results of their effort. A single day of discipline rarely produces a visible transformation. A single workout does not build the body you want. A single page does not complete the book. A single act of patience does not repair a strained relationship. This is why the Stoics focused so heavily on process rather than outcome, on the quality of the action itself rather than the immediate result it produced. Marcus reminded himself repeatedly that he could not control outcomes, only his own effort and virtue in each moment, and this reframing is exactly what allows consistency to survive the long, quiet stretch before results become visible. If you tie your motivation to outcomes, you will quit long before those outcomes arrive, because outcomes are slow and work must come first, sustained over time without guarantee. But if you tie your motivation to the simple, repeatable act of doing what is right and useful today, regardless of what tomorrow brings, you free yourself from the exhausting cycle of hope and disappointment that destroys so many good intentions. This is the quiet power behind everything the Stoics taught about consistency. It does not ask you to feel differently. It asks you to act differently and trust that the feelings, the results, and the transformation will eventually follow the actions, not precede them. So when you find yourself hesitating tomorrow morning, when the resistance rises up and whispers that you can start tomorrow instead, that you can rest just this once, remember that this exact moment, this small, unremarkable choice, is where your character is actually being built. Not in the grand dramatic moments, but in these ordinary ones, repeated quietly over time until they become who you are.